We've come a long way from talking about youth to thoroughly engaging youth.
A state coalition's honest journey to engage, empower, and center youth voices. Last month, this podcast brought you some of the youth who are leading the way in California's fight to end gender and power-based violence. Now I'm sitting down with the staff who created this space for them to speak.
We just believe that youth's perspectives are critical in ending teen dating violence, and that they have the expertise needed to create social change.
Jessica Merrill and Melodie Kruspodin lead the California Partnership to End Domestic Violence's statewide efforts to engage and center youth in violence prevention efforts. On top of training and technical assistance for local centers across the state, they're cultivating youth engagement programs at the coalition, making sure youth voices are heard and centered in the partnership's policy and advocacy work. They put together the Orange Day rally at the Capitol last month, which brought together dozens of youth leaders and gave them a platform to tell policymakers what they need to see in order to create violence-free schools. Jessica and Melodie are bringing their combined expertise in prevention, culture change, communications, and leadership to talk about how the partnership is making space at the table for youth voices. We're sharing honest challenges that come up at organizational and statewide levels, what they've learned in their work, and what's next as they turn the planning they put into Teen Dating Violence Awareness Month into sustainable year-round efforts. All that and more coming up in this episode, part 2 of our Youth Engagement mini-series, right here on PreventConnect. You're listening to PreventConnect, the podcast bringing together voices from across the movement to end gender and power-based violence, to give you the tools to practice primary prevention in your daily life and at work. We're highlighting emerging research, promising strategies, and stories from on-the-ground prevention practitioners doing this work in new and innovative ways. Bringing you topics like foundational strategies to prevent violence, primary prevention, critical race theory and school climates, prevention in a digital age, and more. All coming to you each month wherever you listen to podcasts. I'm your host, Janae Sargent, and this is PreventConnect. Melodie, Jessica, welcome, and thank you so much for hopping on the podcast with us. I'm always excited for these podcasts. It's like my favorite thing that I do. I'm especially excited to talk to you both because we kicked off our youth engagement mini-series last month talking to Armand, Maya, and Anna, 3 youth organizers from the Orange Day rally that you all at the partnership put together and with your youth advisory board. And they were amazing. And we got so much great feedback about them and the work that they're doing. But their work wouldn't be possible if it weren't for you both and the work that the partnership is doing to foster environments where youth leaders like Armand, Maya, Anna, and so many more can thrive. So thank you for being here. Can we maybe just start with some quick introductions for the audience?
I'm Melodie Kruspodin. I use she, her, aya pronouns. I work within the prevention department at the partnership. We provide webinars and trainings for folks around different topics having to do with prevention. We help to facilitate peer learning circles for folks so that we can be in more conversation with preventionists and really be learning from one another. And I provide technical assistance and training to different grantees of different prevention funded opportunities that they have.
And hi, Janae. My name is Jess Merrill. My pronouns are she, her, and hers. And I'm the Associate Director of Communication Strategies at the partnership. And here I do a lot of collective work really with my team around social media advocacy and traditional media advocacy. also promoting the partnership's events like our conferences, but ongoing webinars and trainings as well. Very happy to be here.
So I know a fair bit about the work at the partnership. Obviously, we work together sometimes between Valor and CPEDV. And also, when I was at a local program, I worked really closely with the partnership prevention staff, and I have a lot of respect for the work that you do. Since moving into more of a coalition space myself, coming from youth engagement, I realized that youth engagement from a coalition standpoint, or for people working at a statewide or national level, can feel kind of confusing. Like, it's confusing for me too. When we think about youth engagement, traditionally, it's local centers and community-based. So could you tell us a little bit about what youth engagement and prevention looks like for the partnership and the programs that you all are working on?
So, as partnership staff, we don't always get the opportunity to work with community members directly. We generally work with prevention practitioners or different domestic violence advocates to do the work that they do. But we were really excited in the last few years to take this opportunity to work directly with youth. So, what our youth engagement programs look like currently is we engaged with youth to do a focus group around teen dating violence so that we could gather some information from them about what they felt were like good conversations to have around teen dating violence, and what were youth's beliefs about relationships, healthy, unhealthy, toxic, whatever that might be. And so based on those focus groups, we put together a youth advisory group to help us in determining what our direction was going to be for Teen Dating Violence Awareness and Prevention Month. We had them really just tell us what they thought we needed to be doing. We'll get a little bit more into how we designed the actual program, but that's a little bit about what it looked like. And from there, we decided that for our Orange Day rally, which is the National Day of Acknowledging Teen Dating Violence Awareness and Prevention Month, that we wanted to have a rally at the Capitol. And so we decided that it would be really important to have youth speakers at that event. So that's another way that we really wanted to include and uplift youth's voices, was by directly having them be speakers at this rally. And essentially, all of this was designed because we just believe that youth's perspectives are critical in ending teen dating violence, and that they have the expertise needed to create social change, and that they needed to be included in the work that we were doing.
Totally. I really resonate with that. And also, congratulations on your Orange Day rally and all of your TDVAM events. It was watching that rally back, because unfortunately I wasn't able to attend in person, was really incredible. I mean, you truly led with your values of uplifting and centering youth voices. And it was really cool to talk to a couple of the youth speakers outside of that about what the experience meant to them, and then see them speaking at the rally. It was funny. A colleague and I, we were both talking about some of the speakers and about how it seems like youth these days, maybe not youth these days, youth in general, are more experts on anti-oppression work than a lot of people in the field. Like, concepts that can be really challenging for people who are working professionally to grapple with just seem really natural coming from youth, and I really appreciate that. I also know that impactful youth engagement work is not easy. It takes a long time and some really fundamental shifts organizationally and internally. So if you all don't mind, I would love to get real and honest together and hear from you what it took to create a program like what you have today. Because I'm going to take a wild guess and say that it didn't just happen overnight. How has the partnership grown in its youth engagement work from what you maybe originally envisioned to that Orange Day rally that happened earlier this year in Sacramento?
So I would say we learned more and more each year about the importance of relationship building, asking youth for their guidance and perspectives, paying them for their expertise, and maintaining transparency. Initial efforts around Teen Dating Violence Awareness and Prevention Month really didn't engage youth at all. We were talking about them. Then in following years, we offered to amplify youth at our Orange Day rally, but they weren't involved with the planning. The following year, we engaged youth and we allowed them to share their priorities with legislators, and critical perspectives were heard. And at the same time, we weren't strategic about existing priorities of the partnership. So there wasn't a unified or clear message working toward a larger goal. At the same time, we hadn't always considered a trauma-informed lens when asking youth to speak. So we should have anticipated that some youth were survivors and asked ourselves, how could we guide them towards support? That became a really crucial element moving forward. And then last year, as Melodie mentioned, we established the Youth Advisory Committee for the first time. And this began with a focus group to learn about the issues youth were facing. And I want to talk a little bit about the priorities that youth identified there. So the majority wanted to connect with other youth across the state who were engaged in this work. Also, youth were interested in building solidarity with other campus groups. For example, GSA, Black Lives Matter clubs, and a feminist club were mentioned. Also, it was sometimes difficult to start conversations with peers about healthy relationships. The youth were saying that some would ignore them or laugh at them during tabling events. Youth wanted to also normalize conversations about healthy and unhealthy relationships on campus, among parents, and through classes. And then lastly, half hadn't met with decision makers at the school board, city council, or state level. So the majority wanted to meet with policymakers and receive some technical assistance in doing so. You're seeing that we're starting to make some progress here. Youth are informing, specific partnership activities now that are based on the needs outlined in their focus group. Based on those recommendations, we created an outreach toolkit for youth to educate adult preventionists. We had our first ever youth convening. We supported a youth in writing and placing an op-ed about the importance of youth mental health and funding prevention efforts. And so all of these activities that youth participated in were paid. Regarding the youth convening, this was largely led for and by youth with one adult presenter. 89% said they felt more confident in their activism, and 92% said that the event felt caring and supportive, which was a big goal of ours. So now we're getting somewhere, right? This year, again, we held a focus group, and I want to just discuss a few of the themes. Toxic behavior is romanticized on social media. It's not taken seriously. Youth communicate that it was hard to make an impact on a larger scale, and working within the system is difficult. It's difficult to get the school to plant a tree or remove a police officer who's been causing harm. There's pushback from administrators as well. Essentially, we were transparent that when we started meetings, we already knew about one goal, which was to secure ongoing sexual and domestic violence prevention funding. And this year, we were honest with ourselves and named this as a goal. And we let the youth know that, we needed their guidance and their leadership to put on an event that would put the issue on the radar of legislators. And I'd say this year, we were just more honest with ourselves and had much better synchronicity among all of our internal teams for this reason. We could also even be more transparent with our goals in advertising next year, I would say. I think we were less extractive this year. We shared knowledge with the youth about primary prevention and received examples from them about how the concepts could apply in our campaign. So this was a little more of a partnership between adults and youth. And then youth informed the messaging for promoting and implementing our Orange Day event. So this also strengthened the talking points received by everyone, youth, adult preventionists, and legislators. And youth provided all the elements for the organizing guide we're currently working on, which is going to be used to create social change on campus. So we've come a long way from talking about youth to thoroughly engaging youth, and also being honest about some existing goals and seeing how we can be transparent with youth about the need for their leadership. Melodie, anything you want to elaborate on?
I think the biggest thing, like Jessica was saying, is that we just did a lot of learning based on the last few years. And even though we feel like this year was really successful and we've heard a lot of really positive feedback from the youth who we worked with, we still see room for improvement for 2024.
Thank you for your honesty and for walking me through how the partnership has evolved and continues to evolve. I think we're talking a lot more about authenticity and bringing our full selves and the realities of our work into the movement to end sexual violence. But, of course, we are not all that much different than any other profession, right? I mean, these are our jobs. We want to look good. We want to impress our bosses. We want to impress our funders. And for that reason, sometimes I think work can get put on a pedestal. And so when people aren't able to achieve like these really quote unquote impressive results overnight, it can feel discouraging. So hearing from someone like the partnership, an organization like the partnership, being really honest and saying like, we don't have all the answers, we're just getting better every time, is really powerful. It also sounds like that took a lot of work and a lot of time. And I imagine there were quite a few challenges in there. And so I think it could be really cool if we zoom out for a moment and talk about the why, like why it's important that we do this work. Obviously, we know how prevention and investing in youth leadership benefits youth. But for you both, especially because you work in youth engagement spaces, I'd love to hear how doing this work benefits the partnership, right? Like, so if staff are listening to this or people are listening to this, what do they get from putting in all of the intentional time into building a really impactful program like this?
At the baseline, it just makes our work more authentic to the lived experiences of youth. Youth feel like they learn best from other youth. They are not necessarily driven by adults telling them what to do. And that really, they get validated by hearing from their peers and by hearing from the people who can relate to them the most. And so it's not just about authentically capturing their voices, but really uplifting their voices so that they can be the speakers. They want to be the ones to be delivering that message. And so essentially the work then becomes more effective because those messengers really matter.
I totally agree with that. And I would add that our efforts are so much more effective when we center youth in the issues that are most directly affecting them. And in the area of communications, we have our key audiences at the partnership, and at Valor too, legislators and legislative offices are a key audience. We adults just cannot talk about the extent of the problem like youth can. They have the experience and the expertise to talk about these issues. And I remember, very clearly having rallies in those early years where we really didn't have youth show up. And as youth started attending and also just being the main speakers, and then this year, the youth developing the messaging alongside us, you could tell that all of the messaging, all the speeches were so united, and it was easier for journalists to create a story about why we were there. And they also heard directly from youth in interviews.
That's amazing. And yeah, I mean, it's making me think about my own role in messaging and like how often I bring in voices of people who are not working in the movement. I think it happens to all of us, right? Like we spend most of our days talking to people who work in the professional movement to end sexual violence, and we have our own language and terminology and way of speaking. And sometimes I forget that the general public is not talking about the social ecological model or health equity, but they are talking about the connection between anti-Blackness and sexual violence. And so it's really important that we're bringing in, centering, and compensating people who might be what you would consider like a non-traditional partner, like a youth, and that they are more of a collaborator than just a participant. kind of going off of that, like collaborator versus participant, it might be really helpful for us to dig into the term of youth engagement, because I think that that is another terminology standpoint in the movement that can get kind of confusing for people. I see a lot of programs call themselves youth engagement programs, but they're really youth participant programs, you know? So I would love to hear from you, from the partnership. How do you define youth engagement, and how does engaging youth as partners differ from reaching youth in our programs?
Yeah, I think that this is something that comes up a lot when we think about prevention generally. Traditionally, a lot of us have thought that outreach and education was enough to do prevention. And what so many of us, this, Janae, have learned over these last few years is that outreach and education is not enough, right? We really need to collaborate with communities. We really need to, again, amplify the voices of the people being impacted directly. We have to work for community level change. And so I think it's similar to working with youth, right? So reaching youth is delivering messages to them. Reaching youth is making sure that they have the statistics that they need, that they have the tools that they need, that they have the definitions that they need. But engaging youth is making sure that they feel like active partners in the work that we're doing. We have to treat youth as if they are our collaborators, that their voices are just as important, if not arguably sometimes more important, depending on what we're talking about and what we're doing. Youth have let us know how much this made their ideas and their contributions feel valued. Seeing them get the opportunity to speak directly to legislators, to have their voices be heard, for them to be able to have answered their questions directly. We got so much positive feedback about that by youth who felt like, this was one of the first times that adults were really listening to them and valued their voices and thought that their voices, again, were just as important, if not more important than the adult voices that were in the room.
If you like what you hear, check out other Valor Media podcasts about ending sexual violence and advancing equity. Valor Conversations, a podcast about the collective power to prevent sexual violence in California, or Leadership Moves, a podcast that shares the stories of leaders of color who carry the legacies of those who built the movement to end sexual and domestic violence. You can find both at valor.us or wherever you listen to podcasts. Melody, I want to reiterate what you just said, because that feels really impactful. Reaching youth is going out and giving them tools, resources, definitions, equipping them with something that we have, knowledge that we have. Engaging youth is working alongside them as partners and agents of change. I think that that is really important for a couple of reasons. I see a lot of people, through no fault of their own, like I have done it too. I think we all have done it because you learn through experience. But I see a lot of people going out into their work expecting to engage youth, but what they're really doing is reaching youth. And so when they don't get that impactful engagement, there can be a sense of confusion. Like, I did the thing. I did a Sexual Assault 101 presentation. And at the end of that presentation, I said, would you like to come and work with me? I have a youth engagement opportunity, and no one called. And then we're like, well, what the heck? I did the thing. No one called. But youth are not dumb. And in fact, this is actually a piece of feedback that I often hear from youth. You know, they can tell when someone is coming to them, like treating them as an actual equal and honoring their expertise, versus coming in and expecting them to just kind of listen to what we want to do, right? That also makes us confront our own perspectives in this. Like when we go into youth spaces, are we really seeing them as equals, or are we still seeing ourselves as the experts? Another challenge that I often hear about from prevention practitioners is organizational support and buy-in for youth engagement work. You know, you might have a prevention department that really gets it, but the organizational culture at the agency that they're at might not be totally aligned. They might still be in more of a tokenizing space for youth. And what I'm really loving about this call is Melodie, your prevention staff, and Jessica, your communication staff, which to me says that there's an agency-wide buy-in at the partnership. And that's really important. So can you talk to me a little bit about that? What are some of the foundational pieces that the partnership brings to the table in order to create a safe space for youth?
That's an excellent question. I would say it's so important to maintain humility and a learning mindset because we really are here to see what youth have to say in order for them to best inform our awareness campaigns. There's this tendency to tokenize youth, and we really wanted to make sure that we weren't just paying lip service to involving youth with our organization. This was really seeing the need to set up a committee with, probably about 5 hours worth of planning together. So getting to know each other, doing, the icebreakers, learning about strengths of the youth present and about us, us sharing right back, saying, this is what I'm experiencing today, or, this is who inspires me. I think one of the things that's helped me especially is planning ahead and determining what questions we want to ask youth in advance. I think that has prevented us from just opening things up and saying, all right, tell us what you know about teen dating violence, or, what you want to prioritize in relationships. Their feedback is so much more nuanced than that, and it requires questions that are at the same level. So doing a lot of planning from the get-go, and that took collaborations between the communications team here with prevention and with our public policy team as well. Another recommendation would be investing time and monetary resources to pay youth, and just understanding that, youth time is valuable, and this is a movement strategy. So yes, you're paying youth, but you're also investing in something that's going to move, your community forward, or in our case, our statewide work forward. And that is a very worthy investment. This is also really setting the stage for future involvement in, we believe, public policy efforts and systems change efforts too. So this is providing some information about the policy process, and then hearing from youth and making sure that we know how to frame these issues correctly to the legislature. And then, as I mentioned before, just being honest about what you're able to accomplish together. I think sometimes we want to just open up the floor and do a lot of great brainstorming, and that is wonderful, but also being honest about the level of resources you have in your organization, or the time that you have to accomplish a particular thing, because we don't want to, disappoint youth. We don't want to disappoint ourselves either. So just informing them every step of the way.
No, I think that everything that you said, Jessica, was right on point in terms of, how you do it, right? And how it's important to center youth. And so I would just say, what that currently looks like for us, Janae, is that as Jessica and I both mentioned at the top of this, is that we had our focus group with youth and prevention practitioners so that we could hear from them. And that really helped us be influenced as to how we were going to design our February. From there, we created the youth advisory group where we invited youth to participate so that they could help lead us in the planning for Teen Dating Violence Awareness Month. And then we had our Orange Day rally. So that's been the status of what our prevention youth programs have looked like. And so what we're looking to do now is to create a more permanent youth advisory committee that we can rely on and really seek information from for the course of the year, so that we're not only waiting until December, January, February to engage with youth, but really work with them over the course of the year. So we're really looking forward to that. We're ready to get it started. We're still in the development phase of figuring out what is it that we want this youth advisory group to do, because we don't want it to just be like a token group of youth, like Jessica was saying earlier, to say that we have a youth advisory group. We want to make sure that the group is benefiting us as an organization and is benefiting the youth by participating in it.
So, Melody, what you were saying reminded me of the ways that we tried to make this an enriching experience for youth as well, because we wanted to make this experience reciprocal. And your presentation on primary prevention, but also gathering their feedback at every step and seeing how they would apply those concepts to our campaign, that was really interesting to me.
That's so cool. Thank you for sharing. And that's awesome. I'm so excited to hear that you are extending the Youth Council into a year-round thing. That feels like such a natural and important transition. And it's making me think about how our work transforms when we do work alongside youth, but also like some of the fundamental changes that we have to be prepared for in order to listen to and respond to youth. I think back to my first year as a prevention coordinator doing youth engagement work, and that was something that I struggled with. And I was surprised to find that I struggled with because, in all honesty, I think I was prepared to listen to youth when what they said aligned with what I thought they were going to say. But there were a couple of times when the youth that I was working with told me something that was in contradiction to what I had been trained in. So I'm thinking, for example, doing some community organizing work, youth said that they just wanted to talk about relationship violence. They wanted it to be normalized to talk about relationship violence. I heard that as like going back to awareness. And I had been taught that we as a movement are past awareness. We need to be doing norms shifting. And so in that moment, I went back to a TA I was working with and I asked her, how am I supposed to respond to this? Is this an education opportunity? Do I bring them along? And she said, well, it sounds like an education opportunity, but not for the youth. This sounds like an education opportunity for you. Why do you think that you know more than they do? And I thought, well, that's the training that I got. I didn't feel prepared to hold space for both. I think that that is really important work when we're talking about any kind of community engagement, and it requires some real fundamental shifts. And it sounds like the partnership has some experience in this. So I'm curious for you to, if someone is just getting started out in this work or is struggling with those real on-the-ground challenges and fundamental shifts that youth engagement requires, what are some things that they can do? What are some changes that they can focus on?
Yeah, that's a great question, Janae. I think that, one thing that I've experienced with orgs in the time that I've been doing this work, over a decade now, is that folks think that they can kind of cookie cutter what works for adults and just apply that to youth and say that the same thing that's going to work with adults is going to work with youth. And I think we have to recognize that they are a community unto themselves that deserve to be treated as their own unique community and have their needs met. So I think part of that is, what Jessica and I were saying earlier, that we have to see youth as equals. We have to see them as being just as worthy of our time, just as worthy of our listening, just as worthy of our resources as any adult who we would want to be working with. I think that also we have to reflect youth in the work that we do. Do any of your photos in your brochures capture images of youth? Something as simple as that. Are they seeing themselves reflected in what we're doing? Do we use terms like teen dating violence or dating violence or adolescent relationship abuse when we're going out in the community and talking? Or are we only referring to it as domestic violence? Because, something that we've heard from a lot of youth is that term domestic violence just does not resonate with them. When they hear the term domestic violence, they're thinking what many of us think of. They're thinking about two adults. They're historically thinking about, that person with a bruised eye, that was supposed to have come from the person who caused harm from them. So are we using terminology and examples that are relevant to their life experiences? And then I think something that both you, Janae, and Jessica mentioned earlier is that we have to find the opportunities to pay youth for their contributions. We wouldn't ask an adult to contribute 10 hours of their time in order to help guide us in what to do. So why would we expect the same thing of youth?
Thank you for sharing that, Melody. I think that that's really helpful. And it's reminding me of what we talked about a little bit earlier in this conversation, that let's get real about why we're here, why we're doing this work. Are we looking to foster transformative engagement that is going to have a ripple effect across our organizations, or are we trying to reach youth and grow our programs? I think it can be really important, and it is really vital for organizations to have that conversation internally first and ask themselves, are we in this to boost our numbers and get participants in a program and then keep doing things the way that we've always done things? Or are we doing this to propel our work forward? And do we have the capacity and the foundation to be able to propel our work forward? Because we will undoubtedly get into some challenging waters. And, if orgs are listening to this and they're afraid to have that conversation because they think they might fall into that first bucket, I would just say we're all coming to this movement in different spaces and places, and we're not all going to be ready to do the most radical of the work. Now, I'm not calling youth engagement the most radical of the work, but embarking on work that we are not prepared for, that we have not done the legwork for, can cause some unintentional harm and can lead to some challenges down the road. So I really appreciate you talking about those fundamental shifts that need to happen before we even go out and try to bring youth into our programs. That's obviously my perspective on some of the challenges that I see orgs go through when they try to engage youth. What are some challenges that you see facing the movement as far as it pertains to youth engagement? Why is it hard for people working in a professional violence prevention space to engage youth?
So what I hear you asking, Janae, and is, why is it hard to engage youth in this, right? That's your initial question. And so I think that there's a few different things. One thing Jessica mentioned earlier when we did the focus group with youth was that we heard from youth that there's a lot of romanticization of toxic relationships. That was something that we heard pretty common. And so, on apps like TikTok, they're promoting toxicity in relationships, and youth are starting to see that as how they should build their own relationships. So they're getting messaging that is counter to what we want them to hear. Also, kind of what I was just saying earlier, I think that they're not seeing themselves represented. They're not hearing statistics about themselves. They're not hearing language that's catered to them. They're not hearing examples that reflect what their lived experiences are. Something else I would highlight is that there can be a lot of distrust of adults by young people. And I think that distrust is really well earned. When we talk about what it means to be in a healthy, safe, trusted relationship with a young person, a lot of that is commitment, like you're saying, Janae. And a lot of adults have broken youth's trust in the past. They've said, you can talk to me, I'll always be here, and then you're not there. You've said, hey, I'm a trusted confidant that you can go to. And then we've told somebody what that youth said to us, breaking that confidentiality or that trust with them. We've said that we would follow through on things that we don't. And so I think that it's really on us to prove that we can build trust with youth. And I think we have to earn that trust for them. We can't just assume that they're going to trust us because we're adults, when actually they might off the bat not trust us because we are adults. And so we have to work towards addressing that. But the second thing that I just wanted to acknowledge is that it's hard to engage anybody in these conversations, right? Like, we struggle to talk to adults about ending gender-based violence and about power-based violence. And so if we struggle with getting adults to talk about those things, then it's no doubt we're going to have challenges when talking to youth about that too, especially if we're not meeting their needs.
And I would add, just to the description Melody provided with a funding component, prevention funding has been uncertain. For as long as we've been asking for it. Yes, the state of California has received one-time funding, but we've never received ongoing funding. And that makes it extremely difficult for organizations to plan ahead and to create sustainability in prevention programs, because this work takes staffing, and not just one person. It takes significant staffing and hours spent planning and building relationships. And that's the kind of thing that we really want the state of California to invest in, to make sure that all the momentum built by sexual and domestic violence programs over the years don't get lost.
If you're looking for more content like this, head to PreventConnect.org. We've got tools, guides, and resources on how to prevent sexual and intimate partner violence in your community, all for free and in one easy-to-access digital space. From live web conferences and recordings to a running blog, resource library, e-learning, and online community, PreventConnect has everything you need to implement and evaluate innovative prevention initiatives in your community. All of that and more available for free at PreventConnect.org. Thank you for bringing in that element about funding, Jessica, because you're right. I mean, funding fuels so much of what we do, and we don't talk about funding as it relates to and informs our programs as much as we should. And I think there are a lot of reasons for that. Also, because oftentimes the people who are carrying out the programmatic side of an agency's work may not have been involved in the conversations about the funding. But when our work is fueled by grant cycles that are 2 to 3 years in length and have a long list of requirements, there really isn't a foundation in place for anyone to make long-lasting change. If anyone has done community organizing work, I think they can speak to 2 to 3 years is not enough time, because we're talking about building authentic relationships. 10 years is more of the timeline that we're thinking about, but I have yet to see a grant that lasts 10 years. But even if funding isn't the most fun part of the conversation, it's so deeply important. And it's interesting, every organization that I've interviewed for this mini-series has talked about being intentional with the funding that they go after and not going after funding that doesn't align with their values, because sometimes it can. And I think that's why it's even more important to get program staff in the room to talk about funding, to understand their grants, and to engage in bigger education about the role of funding and funders and legislators in this work. And that's one of the things that I really appreciate about the partnership, because you are not only working with what you have, but you're working to make sure that it's better in the future, and you're not afraid to engage in that system. I know we're coming up on the end of our conversation. I feel like I could talk to you both forever, but I can't. So I would really like to leave our audience with some tips that they can take with them into their work. If you were talking to someone who was just getting started in youth engagement and leadership, what advice would you give to them to make sure that their work is either starting off from a really impactful place, or maybe if they're trying to pivot to make sure that they're going in the right direction?
One thing that I would say that's really going to help you out is to get familiar with things that youth are interested in. So I'm not a TikToker. I look at TikTok if somebody sends me a video. That's really the only time that I'm there. But I know that TikTok is hugely influential to young people. And so I try to do my research about who's popular, what are the trends, what are the popular memes. I don't really get into the dance crazes, but I do try and just know about what some of these things are. But one of the things Jessica mentioned earlier was like youth saying their interest in partnering with things like Black Lives Matter. We know that youth are interested in climate change nowadays. Like, figure out what those intersections are. How does the work that you're doing related to gender-based violence intersect with criminal rights movements? How does it intersect with immigration rights movements? How does it intersect with LGBTQIA plus rights movements? Because those are the things that young people care about. And so if that's where they are at, how do we meet them there? So how do we get ourselves to just become more familiar and more respectful and more honoring of the things that young people are interested in?
There's this concept of social capital, right? Where it's unfortunate, but adults are more likely to listen to other adults and that are doing similar work to their own when it comes to social change. And I think as social justice organizations, sexual and domestic violence programs have this imperative to use our access to say, okay, yes, we would love for you administrators, for policymakers, for community leaders to listen to us. And, before you do that, you're going to listen to this youth leader. You're going to listen to youth leaders from our community who actually speak on behalf of us. They speak for our efforts and for this movement, essentially. And so I think one of the points that I got out of what Melodie was saying was support youth organizing. This is something where youth are in so many different social justice efforts. And if we can bolster what they're already doing or what they're already interested in, and our organizations do have, names for themselves, we can really make sure that we as, aspiring adult allies can support their already existing efforts.
I think this might be the literal opposite of what your point was, but I have to tell you anyways. Melodie, when you were sharing what you were about TikTok, I'm a really visual person, and I just got this mental image of all of the prevention practitioners that I know trying to learn TikTok as like a way to do their prevention, kind of like we do the web conferences on Domestic Violence Awareness and Prevention Month and Sexual Assault Awareness and Prevention Month, like a new PreventConnect web conference, TikTok dances for prevention. I don't think it would go well. I do think that everyone would quit their jobs and be like, nope, this is officially, I'm done with this. I will find a new way to prevent violence. But, actually, that is an interesting point too, because I think that's what a lot of people think that they have to do in order to engage youth. Like, we have to learn this entire other language. If you don't know TikTok, if you're not following the latest music trends, if you're not watching Euphoria, like, you can't have a conversation with young people and about their lives. I was having a conversation recently with a colleague of mine, David Lee, who I think many people know, at Valor, and he's a little bit older than I am, and he was sharing about his youth engagement work, I think from the 90s, he was saying, and even in the 90s, he didn't know a lot of the references that young people were making, but it didn't matter because he had references from when he was their age, and he could bring up those examples and then ask them for their examples, right? Like, we don't have to have all the answers. You don't need to be able to walk into a classroom and reference euphoria. What you do need to be able to do is walk into a classroom and reference the key messages and then ask students and young people what the examples are in their lives and have a conversation with them. Like, be your true self. Youth are going to be able to know if you're trying to make up a TikTok dance just to relate to them. It's much better to be like, I don't know TikTok, but I do know relationships. But also, if you do know the trends, like, great, love that. Somebody's got to do it. It's not going to be me. I will forever be a grandpa. And that's just who I am. That's fine. Well, Melodie, Jessica, as much as I would like to use up your entire day talking about youth engagement, I know that you're busy. I can't do that to you. Also, I don't think our listeners, as much as they love PreventConnect, want to listen all day. So if people are listening to this podcast and they want to learn more about you or the partnership or anything that you've shared, where can they go to get connected?
Yes, thank you so much, Janae. This has been an amazing conversation and really generative. And I learn a lot just by talking with both of you too. And a lot of great ideas are affirmed. I would say visit our Instagram. We have a lot of highlights from the Orange Day rally there. And just generally, we promote a lot of the cool activities that the partnership is engaged in. So it is CA_partnership. That's our handle. We also have some additional tools that folks might be interested in accessing. We have an outreach guide that was developed by youth leaders for adult preventionists in assisting them in developing more meaningful outreach efforts, meaningful and inclusive. So that's on our website, cpedv.org. And we're also going to be debuting another organizing guide that was really led by youth this year, and that'll be on our website.
PreventConnect is brought to you by Valor US and the Centers for Disease Control and made possible by listeners like you. You can find more information about this episode along with past episodes, web conferences, and blog articles at PreventConnect.org. As we work to bring you more podcasts like this one, we want to hear from you. You can interact with us and suggest new topics on our Instagram in the comment section of this episode post. And if you liked this episode, make sure to like and rate this podcast wherever you listen to podcasts so we can reach more listeners like you.